I don't blame you guys for not wanting to invite someone to sit with you at lunch that's gross. But did any of you ever think why they become that way? I mean, they weren't born that way. Gross.
Bodybuilding is just like any other beauty pageant, where looks are the determining factor in the final competition results. And just like these other pageants, these contests are really for the beautiful and the young. No one wants to see ugly, distorted bodies in any of these competitions. No one likes looking at torn biceps, oversized abdominal organs, and skinny legs. Unfortunately for many competitors, Father Time is not always very kind to these narcissistic people. Everyone gets older, and no matter how much pharmaceuticals you take, you will look like crap when compared to the 25-year-olds pumped full of GH and insulin. Just like every major sport, there comes a time when the competition days are over, and you must focus on the business side, or the promotion side of the sport. Yet, many athletes do not get this. Instead, we get to see them at 70% of their best physical condition. They ruin their legacy by showing up looking small and flat. Bodybuilding is great for looking and feeling younger, but the competition stage is for the perfect bodies, not the old men. Let's take a look at some of the competitors that made famous comebacks in the sport of bodybuilding. Very few bodybuilders have been as freakishly huge as Paul Dillett, or Jurassic Paul. His wide frame and 330-pound off-season weight made this mass monster an instant hit on the IFBB stage. But when Paul decided to come back to the professional competition circuit after a 3-year layoff, it was anything but impressive. He transformed into a shell of himself, lacking the size and conditioning that he once brought to competition. His muscles appeared deflated, which left everyone asking, why? Rumors flooded the message boards that Paul was just lazy. Which goes to show, you should never display your body to the public until it's ready. Samir Banaut was once known as the Lion of Lebanon, or the best Lebanese bodybuilder to have ever competed. This Mr. Olympia title holder, and IFBB Hall of Fame inductee, has been competing in the bodybuilding scene since the 1970s. His 230-pound physique was complete, conditioned, and well-proportioned. And it showed in his placings. Samir even beat some of the best physiques in the history of the sport, like Lee Haney and Frank Zane. Although he has admitted to using pharmaceutical drugs, he claims he only did it to reverse catabolic effects. And when Samir came back to the competition stage in 2011, after a 15-year layoff, we are starting to believe him. His new body was flat, and holding water. Although he looks good for his age, there is really nothing to gain by going on stage at 55 years old, way after your prime. Very few mass monsters can have the size and conditioning like Jay Cutler had. This enormous 290-pounder was even big enough to put an early end to Ronnie Coleman's Mr. Olympia career in 2006. But Father Time eventually pays a visit to all bodybuilders that enter into their 40s. And Jay Cutler was no exception. He decided to take some time off from the sport to recover from injuries, but when he returned 2 years later, he looked out of proportion and much smaller than he did in his previous competitions. Add less muscle to a wide frame and waist, and you are headed for a disaster. This 4-time Mr. Olympia champion couldn't even make the top 5 when he came out of retirement. It's hard to believe that this full-blown monster never achieved the title of Mr. Olympia. His density and muscle maturity was some of the best that the IFBB has ever seen. Kevin Levrone was, and still is, a crowd favorite among his many die-hard fans. His natural charisma, and huge muscles made him a star both on and off the Olympia stage. After retirement, Kevin pursued successful careers in acting and music. But living the life as an artist is not always as much fun as being a freak. After a 13-year layoff, Kevin was back on the Mr. Olympia stage. And at 52 years old, it's hard to compete against guys like Phil Heath, especially when the legs and back have gotten smaller. If you follow any type of bodybuilding history, then you know that Flex Wheeler had one of the most aesthetic physiques in the sport. Some even claim he had the perfect combination of symmetry and conditioning. But it wasn't all fun and games for Flex. He had to overcome great adversity during his bodybuilding career, like a serious car accident, depression, and even a kidney transplant. But the greatest travesty is that fact that this competitor never won the coveted Mr. Olympia prize. What was also shocking was that Flex decided to compete after a 14-year layoff, in the less popular classic physique category, a division that's for athletes that can't cut it in the big leagues with the mass monsters. Unfortunately, Flex didn't perform up to par. His calves and forearms were small, and his waist was wider than the competition. This one-time bodybuilding god came in 15th place. One of the more recent comebacks was that of the 300-pounder, Dennis the Big Bad Wolf. This monster was gifted with size, height, and great symmetry, which has given him years of high placings on the Olympia stage. But it all seemed to come to an end after his recent neck surgery. Even after training for the Arnold Classic after 3 years off, Wolf's upper body still looked small compared to his legs. Muscle atrophy is always a big problem after major surgery, especially when you consider the nerve damage and scar tissue involved. He can make a comeback, but it will never be 100%. This list would not be complete without the most shocking comeback in bodybuilding history. Not only was Arnold's entry into the contest a complete surprise after a 5-year retirement, but his separation and conditioning was as well. And at 220 pounds, Arnold was still the biggest guy on the stage in 1980, despite what the other competitors have said throughout the years. This event became rather controversial, and was never aired on national television. Unlike many other comebacks, Arnold's was very successful. So much so, that Mike Mentzer ended up quitting from the sport entirely, because he thought the show was rigged. Perhaps this is one reason why Arnold is considered the greatest bodybuilder of all time.